Started from 0 followers on TikTok, only 8,000 followers on Instagram. For me, these numbers didn't make sense, but it was just like, wow, like I think this thing has legs. I go into my dashboard and did 1,800 copies in 3 days.
Holy shit.
And I was like,
bestseller,
holy shit.
Ranked first in the category.
I was in the top 100 books on all of Amazon. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like I've never experienced virality before in my life. You know, like dopamine's firing off. I'm just all over the place. I knew so deeply that I needed to be aligned with something that felt fulfilling to me. So I was willing to do whatever it took because I was so unhappy in my current situation. At first, this job was aligned with my degree, but it was truly out of desperation for finances. I need money. And what I learned is that usually it doesn't put you in the place where you're meant to be. No matter how full my bank account was, my heart, my soul, my spirit was empty. And that was the indicator that I was in the wrong place. I need to find something that's gonna make me feel fulfilled because really at the end of my life, I don't care about a full bank account. So we're driving side by side, going 85 miles per hour. And I remember like seconds before this happened, I had this urge to ask my friend to slow down, but then something like quieted. I can't believe it's actually happening to me. For so long, you think about like, oh, that's never going to happen. I got this golden bubble around me protecting me until it's actually happening to you. And I was like, oh shit, this could either be good or it could go really bad.
I was pontificating to myself about the idea of success and how the way that word is normally used is as an indicator of someone who master the capitalism game, but they're not necessarily, we don't really ask, how do they feel? Right. And you talked about in your book, you talked about working in the mortgage industry and how you were making more money than you'd ever seen in your entire life. And it looked on paper to be this glamorous sort of life and existence, but it didn't feel even the slightest bit glamorous to you. So just talk a little bit about that experience and I guess take us a little bit deeper into that feeling you're describing and how did that inform the next steps in your journey?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people can relate to that, you know?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a big challenge a lot of people go through is finding something fulfilling. And, you know, I was traveling for those 3 months after college, using every dollar to my name to fund this trip. And for the record, I was on a crazy budget trip. I financed this trip myself. And so I was doing everything as cheap as possible, and staying in the cheapest hostel, just trying to get through all the hoops to make this money stretch the distance that I needed it to. And so I'm in the middle of my trip and I'm like, maybe a month out from coming home. And at this point, my credit card limit was getting over, like my credit card balances were getting over the actual limit because I had effectively ran out of money. But I was like, I need to finish this trip. And so I was starting to get like pretty stressed out financially. And I wanted to expedite the process of getting a job. So I sent my resume to a friend who worked with this mortgage company, asking him if he could put me in as a referral, so that when I got home, I could like come home right in time for the interview. And so he did that. So I had this like mortgage job that's starting to like cook on the back burner while I'm out just like running around for the last month in Europe. And so I get home and land the job. I think it was maybe a month or two after I had gotten home. And I was sleeping on a homie's couch for the time until I found an apartment and got like a paycheck and all that kind of stuff. So really at first, this job was, yes, it was aligned with my degree, but it was truly out of desperation for finances. And so that was the driving factor of the decision was I need money. And what I learned is that usually doesn't put you in the place where you're meant to be. And I learned that through doing the work and realizing that I left empty every single day. No matter how full my bank account was, my heart, my soul, my spirit was empty. And that was the indicator that I was in the wrong place. And I had a realization that, I'm going to work for the rest of my life. I need to find something that's going to make me feel fulfilled when I leave the office. Because really at the end of my life, I don't care about a full bank account. I want a full life experience of the things that I got to do that made my heart feel full. And it was
What are some of the indicators of that emptiness you're describing? Were you drinking? Were you like just vegging out in front of the TV? Were you going to bed at 7 o'clock at night? Like, how was that showing up in your life, that emptiness?
lack of motivation,
Apathy.
and feeling like energetically depleted. I think when you work on creativity in general, and creativity can be anything, it's not just art, but like creating anything. Being in a mortgage role and making a spreadsheet, that's also creativity. And I think a lot of people get that mixed up or don't think they're creative. But just exerting energy like that it's exhausting. Like creative energy or creative work takes a lot out of you, but it can also give so much back to you. And so when I recognized that I was not feeling like my cup was getting more full, but it was just getting more empty and more empty and more empty, that's when I realized like I was in the wrong place. And to the point I was making earlier, that all came from my self-awareness that I developed on that trip. And like I said, self-awareness is the first step toward change. It's the first step toward improvement. Had I not had that awareness, I could still be in that job today. It's like my awareness was the catalyst to me even understanding that I was in the wrong place.
And what we sometimes do is we start telling ourselves stories like, maybe I'm just in the wrong apartment. Maybe I'm just in the wrong relationship. Maybe I'm just in the wrong this or that, or not realizing that it's actually this thing that I'm spending 8-10 hours a day doing that's not really allowing me to tap into my talents, my gifts, my full potential. And I think the journaling you're describing inevitably gives you an opportunity to really to see that it comes out. You can't keep it from coming out if you're journaling every day in the way you're talking about, right?
Yeah. It's like
you start seeing themes and patterns. You keep saying the same shit over and over,
and you're like, oh, well, I need to change this thing. I keep writing about how much I hate this part of my life, or how much frustration I feel in this relationship, or the tension I feel around this type of work. And so it is the recurring themes. And so like, yes, you can journal your way to that truth, but I also think there's a reflective part of that process as well. Because if you're not actually looking at things that are coming out in your journaling, you're not actually understanding or seeing those recurring themes, because you're not doing the work to reassess what's been going on. And it was just recurring, it's just every day. I just like, one, didn't feel motivated to go into work, which is a problem that many people have. And then didn't feel very great after work, besides the fact that it was done, and really look forward to Saturday and Sunday. And I just think that's like not the right way to live for myself. And I want to say this because I think right now, what we're seeing in the space of, I guess, all work is with the rise of technology and with the rise of social media, entrepreneurship is pushed heavily. It's pushed heavily. And
it's even equated with purpose. Like if you're not an entrepreneur, you're not living your purpose.
Yeah. If you're not working on your passion, you're not living your fullest life. And so there's a lot of like societal pressure and peer pressure to become an entrepreneur and to get out of the 9-to-5. But I don't think that's true. I think we're going to see a shift where people start to value work in a way that opens up their life to doing what they do love, not tied to money outside of work or fulfillment. And so I say that because I don't want people to hear my story and think that the only way to a fulfilling life is not working a 9-to-5 or aligning with your job with your passions. I still think there's a way to find purpose within a traditional corporate job.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So talk about how you pivoted and got closer to that, what you're describing of having more fulfillment in your day-to-day existence.
Yeah. I mean, I took it right back to the journal. It's like, it's my spot where I just know I can get so much clarity. And I started to really explore what makes me feel fulfilled, not related to anything with work or money. Just like, what things do I do in my life that make me feel excited and fulfilled and inspired and motivated? Because I always knew I wanted to eventually turn one of my passions into my work. I just always had that feeling that felt like destiny to me. And so I was like, well, I just fell in love with writing on my trip to Europe. Like, I wonder if there's a world in somewhere out there where I could make a living doing writing. And so I kind of started to explore like what that looked like. And at the time, my brother was writing for online publications, and he had a couple freelance clients. And so I just asked him like, hey, like I really want to do this eventually, but I have a finance degree. I don't know shit about journalism, and I got nothing to prove when I go apply for a job. But I figured I could find a way. I figured there had to be a way. And so he kicked me some of his freelance clients. And so I started writing for them. Was not pretty in the beginning at all. And I would work for my mortgage job from 8 or 9 to 5, get home, have a snack. And then I would write for about 2 hours. So I'm working close to 10-hour days just to find a way out of something that didn't fulfill me anymore. Now, I will say that time period of me going through trying to build I was trying to build a portfolio, and it wasn't easy by any means, but I knew the reward at the end of it was worth the work. And that was my way to, like, I knew so deeply that I needed to be aligned with something that felt fulfilling to me. So I was willing to do whatever it took to get there because I was so unhappy in my current situation.
It's like the baseball thing. You brought that baseball practice, the garage, throwing the thing, and hitting the ball. And what I love about this part of the story is that you didn't quit your job, but you changed your relationship with it. And instead of becoming this thing that was a drag where you're watching the clock all day and waiting for the weekend, now it becomes your funding mechanism to support this passion, this thing that you're more passionate about. And so now you're doing both. And I think that that's another common misconception, is that we have this idea of it's got to be either or. Either I'm living my passion or I'm working this dead end situation. And the reality, 99 times out of 100, is that you kind of have to do both for at least a period of time in order to get liftoff with the passion thing.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And actually was just having a conversation with a family member over Thanksgiving. And he was talking about how he was looking to go back to work because it was becoming a little bit too stressful to like chase his dream without any financial support. And what I was telling him from my own experience was kind of what you're saying right now, is having that financial security, I think, allowed me to create what I needed to create without the sense of urgency. And so it gave me more freedom to do my best work and learn what I needed to learn without feeling like I wasn't going to be able to pay a bill. Although maybe I didn't want to be working that many hours was much better than quitting my job and then having absolutely no cash to support myself. So I think it's a good reminder that you still can chase a dream. You still can chase a new line of work while you're working at your current role. Now, you will have to create time outside of that, but if you want it, it's there. You can do it.
Yeah. So how long did you have to work before you got liftoff?
So I landed my first writing job in 2018. And I started, so it was probably like a year and a half or a year after because I had worked the job, and it took me maybe a year to realize like, okay, I need to find something different. So I would say like a year and a half until I could actually was able to land a full-time writing job. And what's interesting is during that journey of trying to build a portfolio of articles, I start interviewing at this online publication out of New York City. And as I'm in the interview process, one of my clients tells me that I wasn't good enough and they were going to let me go. And so now I'm in this internal battle of trying to remind myself that I still can do it when this person over here is telling me, hey, you're not good enough. And this company's like, hey, we're about to hire you. And so now I'm in this weird narrative of what to actually hold on to. And I think that actually, it's interesting. I've never thought about this, but that experience was similar to the car accident. There's two choices. There's always two sides to the coin. And I've done my absolute best to be deliberate about always choosing the positive side of the coin. So is the car accident going to take my life and spiral out of control? Or am I going to use it and leverage it as a way to change my perspective forward? Am I going to latch on to the thing that this person says that I can't do? Or am I going to latch on to my self-belief so I can do the thing that I know I want to do? And so that's been a very interesting like duality of my life. And I'm sure it's similar to a lot of people. But every situation, every experience, there's two sides. And the way forward depends if you choose the negative or the positive side.
Yeah, I've written recently about how we all have our own self-generated echo chamber in our head, which are those voices, and the dominant voice is the one you listen to the most. And, you know, around this time, you said 2018, you're right. You're starting to write your first book. This is a very audacious endeavor. What gave you the audacity to think that you had enough life experience to write a self-help book? Because I imagine you had imposter syndrome, and you know, and you're still learning really how to write properly. And I'm assuming this is a self-published book. Maybe you tried to get it published first. You had a proposal. Talk a little bit about this process, because I think I want to kind of dive deeper into this process than we've talked about any of the other aspects of your life, because I feel like a lot of people who listen to this podcast in particular are on the cusp of doing something like that. And I want to give them the real impression of what it's like. Because I think people who write books are somehow especially gifted or talented, or, you know, and in my experience, that's not what it is. You just have to be willing to take something to the end and put it on paper and know that it's going to take 100 drafts in order to get to the point where it's legible. And so talk about the genesis of that experience for you.
Yeah. So my writing journey with books really actually started with the journal. So you can't find it online anymore, but I had written a short form. It was like a 100-page book the purpose of it was just kind of the inner circle community
Moment?
thing.
Was that Moment?
Yeah. Moment to whom it may concern. And that book was in the 2-month gap when I got back from Europe and started my job. Again, intention. I was sleeping on my buddy's couch with nothing to do. And I just I can't just sit. I can't go surfing in the morning and then come back and sit for 6 hours. I need to do something. And this is when I was really starting to connect with my creativity. And creativity for me is such a big source of my life. It gives me so much. And so I decided, I was like, hey, I got this journal of all these really dope travel stories. Like, what if I just copy that into a Google Doc and started working on a book? And so I put like present day reflections of what lessons I was learning. And that was like my first experience with book writing. Now I've gone back and read it before, and I'm like, man, I was a far off from where I am now. But you got to start somewhere. And so I think that was the thing for me was I never made myself believe I couldn't do it for this, like, because I hadn't done it yet. I knew I could continue to work that muscle, and just like the baseball thing, like through consistency, I would get better. It's like going to the gym. You know, it's like you start to lift, and then you go in a week later and you're like, oh, I can lift a little bit more. And you go in a week later and you can lift a little bit more. Everything works that way, whether you're working a muscle or working a talent or a skill. And so I figured out.
You read The War of Art too around that time, right? Stephen Pressfield's book.
I did, yeah. It's that was a big thing for me. The biggest takeaway from that book, was just being the professional. Mm-hmm. And that's something I've really taken to heart, even as I move into like my speaking career, is like, how can I lead and how can I create as if I've been doing this forever? What level of intention would someone 20 years ahead of me put into their work? Why can't I do that now? And so that was kind of a really big lesson at that time, was just like honestly taking things seriously, even if only 100 people bought my first book, but give it as much purpose and as much level of dedication as if 1 million people read it, as if 10 million people read it. So for me, it's always been being the professional before maybe I'm actually the professional that I think I'll be, and then just being highly dedicated to the process, and just giving it a lot of value and just being really purposeful and intentional with the creation of it.
Hey, so a lot of you all have been reaching out with guest suggestions. Like, you should interview President Obama. You should interview Oprah Winfrey. And look, I'm definitely sending out invitations to people like that all the time. But something that you can do right now to help make it easier for those kinds of guests to say yes to my invitation is to subscribe to my channel. That's why you always hear podcasters like me saying, please subscribe to this channel. I'm just being honest. So if you could just hit the subscribe button right now, that's literally the best way that you can help me get you bigger guests on this show. All right. Thank you so much in advance for that. And back to the show. You and I are both in the same speaker community, and we were both on this call that we had recently where the guy that started the community, Josh Linkner, was sharing a mock schedule for a speaker. And that was very eye-opening for me because, to your point, I haven't been scheduling my speaking practice in that same way. And I know you have. You've been very consistent about practicing on a daily basis and incorporating that, like what you said, the professionalism into your craft. And I think that's something that I think, we all need to get to that place in order to really, really take things to the next level. But before we get to that, because I do want to talk about that, let's just finish up the book conversation.
Yeah.
You self-published this book?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you said that you didn't launch it until 2021, even though you started writing it in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, just about. So the book was done pre-pandemic. I was going to release it in the summer of 2020. And then I was like, if no one's over my shoulder, publisher, telling me that I need to get it out by a certain date, why would I rush it when I feel like it's not the right time to put a book out? Potentially in one of the most difficult times to market a new product. Too much other noise. And so I just listened to my intuition and did what I felt was best for me and held on to it for another year. And during that year, I just kind of cleaned up the edges, worked on the creative of it a little bit. Nothing major to the point where it changed the message of the book. But just tried to look for opportunities during that year to make it a little bit better since I had the time. So it took me about 2 years to create, but 3 years to put out with that kind of year gap I held on to it for.
Mm-hmm. Now, I put out 4 books so far, planning to put out more. It's hard, man, to market a book. It's really hard. And you never know like what's going to cause it to pop. Right, and my first book was a self-published book. I had, to this day, I think it has like about 170 reviews. Your book has 620 something reviews, which to anyone who's ever put a book out, published with a publisher or self-published, doesn't matter. To get that many reviews means that a lot more people have read your book and that have spread the messages in the book. And so just, and I know you and I had a conversation many months ago about your book popping and how that happened through, I think, social media. So just, can you just break down the case study?
Yeah.
A self-published author who releases a book, you don't know what's going to happen, but you were intentional about how you were going to market the book.
Yeah. I mean, first I want to say, I appreciate the reminder of that, because I think it's really easy for me as a human to get stuck in the not enough narrative. And so it's just really nice to hear that from you. So I appreciate you.
You're comparing your book to, I don't know, Will Smith's book that has 23,000 reviews or something.
Like I look at Atomic Habits, I'm like, damn, 100,000. Like I'm way off. So I appreciate that, because I'm human and it's really easy for me to downplay that kind of stuff. So I would first want to say my competitive edge to start for me was my age. And I say that because I have a different understanding, or not understanding, but connection and comfortability with social media.
Right.
That's my place of expressing my voice. And I know sometimes it maybe doesn't come as easy to other people, but for me, that felt like the strength that I could lean on that could maybe lend me some sort of visibility because I had no money to spend on anything. So I figured I'll use my social media. It'd be great. So the book comes out in June of 2021, does great during the launch week, which is expected, friends, family, hooting and hollering and all that.
What is
stuff.
great? What are we talking about? Like 1,000 copies sold or?
No, I think I did like only 100.
Okay.
Which for me,
great. Right. Because you weren't like a big personality or you didn't have a huge platform at this time, right?
No, when I released my book, I had 8,000 followers on Instagram and I didn't have a TikTok account.
Mm-hmm.
No, it felt like no one was really there, and before this, I was a travel photographer. So my audience on Instagram for the last decade was
looking for photographs
and not a book about self-discovery. And so I was in this really weird phase, to be honest, right when I launched it, where I was sharing both. And so I really hadn't committed to one or the other yet. And so it was just like, to me, those 8,000 people weren't actually there for that kind of content quite yet. So I say that meaning I didn't start with much.
Right.
And so put the book out in June 2021, does great during the launch week, and then just falls flat. Like I'm selling like 5 or 7 copies a month for like 6 months. And I'm like, damn, like I feel like I'm done. Like I lost my chance. I kind of was like ready to give up. I didn't think I had it in me to become an author, or I was already an author, but become a known author with work that is respected and shared amongst other people.
Did you get crap about the title having profanity in it and stuff like that? Like,
no, but
question any of that and decide maybe I should change something about it?
No, I actually had a different title, which I've never actually talked about. And the title was Run Yourself Wild. It was the very first title of the book. And at the time, I was very much in more of my artsy and creative and like fluid, just like connection with that travel art. And I feel like that's kind of where that title was inspired from. And then I was writing one day and like just boom, like You Deserve the Shit just popped in my mind. And I was like, hold on. I don't know where that came from. I don't know which world that was just pulled in from, but it just stuck. And I remember like wrote it down on a piece of paper and I was like I think I knew it was so good that I was nervous to actually tell someone else. And so my girlfriend at the time, I told her eventually, like it was like 2 months after I thought of the name. I was like, oh, I had this other name for the book. And I was like, You Deserve this shit. And she was like, just had this big reaction. And we were just like, that's it. Like that's the name. And so I never had any pushback. I think people really were stoked on the name. The only thing that happened was I couldn't run Amazon ads because of the profanity. And so that was part of the thing that caused me to think after 6 months of no sales, I can't run ads. Like I just thought it was game over. I didn't understand that I could make something out of it still. And so I was just doing all Instagram at the time and just kind of posting photos. It wasn't really quite the place we're at now with the ecosystem with how heavy people go on Reels. So I was posting photos of the book, wasn't converting. And then, kids were talking about TikTok. It was really on its rise. And I was like, well, I just got to try it. Like at this point, this isn't working. I got to do something different. And so I go over to TikTok and I start posting, but at the time I'm still posting travel and self-improvement content. So things are connecting, things aren't connecting, videos aren't doing great. And I'm like, this is pretty discouraging. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to Instagram. So I stopped doing TikTok and go back to Instagram. Things aren't working again. And I'm just like, at this point, I'm like, I don't even know what to do. And so the first thing was, I need to decide if I'm invested in travel or if I'm here to do self-improvement work. And by all means, although I don't take or post photos anymore, like this photo behind me is mine, like travel photography is one of my greatest passions. I'm a huge outdoor guy, have been for my whole life. And it's something I still do, but I don't share it professionally. And so I just had to decide, what's the thing I actually want to do for business? I had started making money doing photography, and that took the fun out of it for me. And that was a really clear sign that it wasn't meant for monetary purposes. And so the first thing was deciding, okay, I'm going to go all in on self-improvement. I'm going to stop posting travel and just post about personal development, self-improvement content.
What made you make that decision? Was it a feeling? Did you have a conversation?
To go all in on self-improvement?
Yeah. And to abandon the travel stuff, which somebody would look at the travel stuff. That's your purpose. That's your dream. You're so good at it, blah, 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 blah. So you have that going on in your head.
Yeah. And I think it's still part of my purpose, but I don't think we need to make money on all parts of our purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now, for me, the payment is joy.
It's a paycheck for your spirit.
Paycheck for my spirit. Paycheck for my heart. Absolutely. So it was just being real with myself, like really thinking about business and like where I want to go in the future and what would make a good brand. I was having a really hard time. For so long, I was trying to intertwine the two somehow in some way. Like for a little bit, I thought I was going to do these like travel retreats that were really around self-discovery, and it's trying to really find like a cool niche, and it just wasn't connecting. And so it was just me being realistic, like, yo, dude, one or the other. Doesn't mean you need to quit the other thing. Just this is the one you're going to go after for business purposes. And so it was just a reality check. Was like, hey, you need to make a decision. And once I did that, I then went back to TikTok. I was like, okay, I'm going to try TikTok again, but I'm going to do it in a way that I'm only posting the self-improvement. So I'm not confusing the algorithm, confusing my audience, viewers, all that kind of stuff. And I start posting. I was like, oh, why don't I do like book recommendations? Why am I not recommending my book to people as a book to read? And so I started doing these book recommendations where I include my book and a couple other of my favorite books that have had a profound impact on my life. And I remember it was December 26, 2021. And I'm at my parents' house for Christmas. And I wake up and I'm just like on TikTok, and I saw like this book recommendation video, getting some good traction. It was probably at like maybe like 150,000 views, which is a lot of people. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like I've never experienced virality before in my life. Like dopamine's firing off. I'm just like all over the place. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what this is doing to my book sales. And so I go into my dashboard, and 100 books had sold over one night. That's the same amount of books I sold like right when I released the book. And I was like, whoa, okay. Started making all these connections of like what I could do now that I've recognized the power of the platform and the power of social media and the power of sharing the book. And so I just leaned in hard to the book during that time. At first I was like, oh, whatever, like this is a flash in the pan. Who am I to get more? Like I'm just like insecure kid, not very confident. Like, why would I get more success through this? I just thought it was going to be like one and done. Keep posting about the book, and the engagement's doing really good through January. Obviously a great time of the year for that stuff. January ends, and I'm like, dang, we did 1,000 copies in January. It's the most copies I've ever sold. And then again, self-doubt comes in. Nothing else is going to come from it. This isn't going to continue. Who am I to experience this kind of abundance? All those kind of things. And then I posted a video in February, the first weekend of February, and it got 3.5 million views with my book in it. And my brain, what was it?
Was that the 7 Things I Don't Do Anymore video?
No, it was 3 books that will change the way you think.
Okay. And were you kind of like recycling the same theme and including your book as one of the books that, like, how many iterations of this 3 books can I do? Yeah.
So, my book was always a book that I recommended because, like, truthfully, I wouldn't recommend my book because I believe in it. But it wasn't the same like video or the same books. I would again, intention.
And how often were you posting?
Dude, at the time I was doing like 3 videos a day on TikTok. It was quite absurd, to be honest. Just now thinking about where I'm in creation. And especially after seeing like it work, I started to like go in harder and lean in.
But it's like that hit or miss thing, because you'll do something else that has the same quality, another listicle, crickets. And then you do another one and it's like 10,000 views, and then another one, crickets. And so you have to really let go of the outcome.
Yeah. And that's why it's addictive, because you start to hunt the dope. That's truly what it is. And that's like, I've experienced a lot of that. And there's definitely a lot of learning lessons we could get in a whole conversation about that specifically. But I post that video, 3 books that will change the way you think. I included The Surrender Experiment, which is like one of my favorite books. So if you're listening and you haven't read it yet, that was like the start of my spiritual journey. And there was another book I can't remember. The Mountain Is You, which is a book about self-sabotage. And that video just went crazy. And I was like, just started computing in my head, like, okay, if this many views in December, did 100 copies in a night. If we did this in January, did 1,000, 3.5 million views, like what could that do? And so I, go into my dashboard, did 1,800 copies in 3 days.
Holy shit.
And I was like,
bestseller, ranked first in the category of whatever, self-development.
I was in the top 100 books on all of Amazon. Like it was,
I love it.
It was crazy. I was like, didn't spend $1 on paid ads.
Mm-hmm.
So organic only. Started from 0 followers on TikTok, no account, only 8,000 followers on Instagram. And so for me, these numbers, they just didn't make sense quite yet. But it was just like, wow, like I think this thing has legs. And I always believed it. I believed it did. And it did from the second I wrote it. But to see it actually start to work was like, okay, I wasn't just being delusional. Like this is real. And then that's kind of what took the book and has just compounded since then. And those numbers are really high. And so for me, it was relearning that wasn't the normal, so that I didn't get let down when it was 500 books or 100 books in a month, and still seeing 100 books. If I had 100 people in my house, like, there wouldn't be enough room. It's a lot of people. But that was the trajectory of the book, gaining this momentum, getting its legs, and starting to really connect with people.
Yeah. And then some chapter president in Idaho reads the book and reaches out to you. And what does he want?
So this guy last April, I get this email. It says, "Hey, Jordan, read your book. We'd love for you to come speak to our chapter. Like, I'm putting the learning calendar together." And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like my book, I didn't even know this guy. He just read it, connected with the message, found my email somehow. And it was interesting because I always knew I wanted to do speaking, but I never actually gave it thought. Like as a kid, and still to this day, one of my dreams of speaking is to give a commencement speech. And that's something I've always just felt naturally drawn to. Just always felt, every time I went to a graduation and saw the speaker, I would just be like, I want to do that. It just seemed like a really cool place to influence people and impact people at a really good point in their turning point in their life. It's a really good spot. And I've always felt really connected to that spotlight. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I've always wanted to do speaking, but never actually thought of how to get there. So it felt like the universe just put this thing on a platter and said, hey, if you want to do it, it's right here. It's right here. And I took a second and I was like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know anything about the business. I don't have a keynote. I don't have a speech. I don't know how to write a speech. And so I thought to myself, who do I know in the space at all who could help? And at the time, I had sent a marketing box, or I guess when I put out the book, to Ben Nemtin. So I sent him my book when I put it out. So we had some loose connection via DM to where he knew about me, of me. So be it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to ask him for help. Because for me, I've always been someone to just ask. I don't let the fear of rejection get in the way of asking someone for support or for help. And that has opened so many doors in my life, because I don't know what would happen if I didn't ask, I wouldn't get it. So just asking makes me feel like there's more possibility for something happening. And so I just asked him, I sent him a voice note. I said, hey dude, got this speaking inquiry. I really want to do it, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to charge. I don't know how to go about the process of closing the deal. I don't even know what to say in response. Like, what kind of details do I need to give him? And like 2 weeks goes by and Ben hasn't responded. And I'm like, shit, like I'm probably just another dude in his DMs wanting something from him. Like, who am I? He's probably busy. I mean, like, top speaker on the circuit. Like, how often is he in his DMs? And how busy are his DMs? And then one day I get a ping and I got a message from Ben. And I open the message and it's like a 7-minute long voice note. And he's like in the airport. It's like loud. He's like, I don't know if you can hear me, dude, but like, and he's like shouting on his phone. And he basically holds my hand from A to Z on everything I need to do, from what to charge and how to close a deal to do this. And it was one of those moments where, again, I realized like, feels very divine. And I feel very unconditionally supported by people that I personally know. And that made me feel like it was like one of those meant to be. Like this opportunity was placed in my hands for a specific reason. And just having that connection to the opportunity made it feel like this was like my next venture and next part of my creative career. And so I closed the deal, locked in the speech, and then Ben was like, hey, like, if you really want to do this, you need to go to camp with Impact 11. And again, thinking back to like the process with the book and the baseball stuff, be the professional now. And so that's when I started to take speaking really seriously, because I knew the level that I want to take it. And that's how it turned into what it is becoming right now.
And talk a little bit about your regimen now with speaking. You write the speech, you practice it on a daily basis, whether you feel like it or not. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's a little different right now because I'm developing a new one. But when I wrote the first speech, like regardless of if I'm writing a speech or not, I write in some capacity 5 days, for different projects of my own, like whether it's a newsletter or I'm writing like sometimes I'll just, if I don't have a specific thing I'm trying to achieve, I'll just do a creative writing session and just have like a channeled stream of conscious around some topic, just to kind of keep the muscle working. Like going to the gym, I work out every day. Well, I should probably work out my writing skill as well. So when I wrote the first keynote, I was just writing every single day. And then Josh Linkner with Impact 11, the thing that I really took away from his preparation was a keynote isn't ready until it's performed 21 times before the event. And so with me, in my work ethic and how I like to do my work and prepare for things and the intention I like to put into it, I did that. I did 21 times every single day. I would record it and like a little part of it and put on my Instagram story as kind of as an accountability partner. Like, if I will post every time I do it, be like, okay, I did it for today. And that really locked me into a new level of preparation with something that I've never done before. And to tell you the truth, no one knew that this was my first event that I was going to be speaking at. The people that reached out didn't know that I wasn't a speaker. And so my goal was to show up on that day and act and give a speech in a way that people would think I've been doing it for years. And so that took a specific level of preparation to give me the confidence, form in a way that didn't make me feel like it's my first speech.
Would you mind sharing what you charged them? Just ballpark?
Yeah, it was fee was $7,500. Travel was $15,000. So it came out to like $9,000. And for a guy with like, there is so much imposter syndrome that can come with that. A guy who's never given a speech before is charging close to $10,000. However, like I do have a presence. I do have a successful book. So there is something of value that I have that made me feel worthy of that amount. And that's what Ben had recommended based on what he thought of my presence and what I do in the world. But there is a level of imposter syndrome, but also motivation that came from that from the level of preparation I was in. It wasn't, a free gig where I'm like, oh, I'll show up and like just say whatever. I was like, well, I have an obligation to uphold.
Yeah.
They're paying me this amount of money because they believe that I will come and deliver on that value. And that really helped me lock into that preparation.
Yeah, listening to your story, man, it's so fascinating because again, if somebody were just to enter into your life today, they would say, "Oh, they would think something was special about you." And we're all special in a way, but you can also see the breadcrumbs of the story going back. If you hadn't gone all in on TikTok, that video wouldn't have gone viral. Maybe this guy who purchased your book got it in that wave of 1,800 people who bought the book because they saw that viral TikTok video. And if you hadn't tried to get Instagram going, you maybe not have gone on TikTok. And if you hadn't written the book in the first place, you wouldn't have even been on there trying to do that. And if you hadn't started writing those articles, and reached out to your brother and started journaling, and you could just keep going back and back and back. And I would make the argument that whatever we, the audience, are curious about today is going to become a pivotal step. If you lean into that, it's going to become a pivotal step in whatever your journey is going to ultimately be. So what are you speaking about these days?
Choosing change and creating possibilities is the premise of my talk. So I'm launching a new brand, which is technically my first real brand, in January. Up until now, I've just bootstrapped everything. Like this book right here, my wife at the time, girlfriend, had the cover idea as we were falling asleep, because I had a different book cover. It was blue and yellow. It was like so different. And she was just like, "I don't think that's the right cover. I see this." And she saw this, and I woke up and I made it.
You designed it yourself?
Yeah, just went Photoshop. And like, I do have a creative background. I've done a lot of like photography and graphic kind of stuff. So I had the means to be able to do that. So, and like my website, I've always made my own websites. I used to have there was a time in my life for like 6 months where I had a web design side hustle. I was always just trying, I was just always very entrepreneurial. That was just like my spirit from a very young age. And so I was always just trying to find a way to make my own work. Up until now, it's all been strapped and just kind of making stuff without a clear direction. So I'm finally, for the first time, developing a brand around all this work with a specific vision, a specific mission, and a specific goal. And that all comes out in January, that's why I'm developing the new keynote, because now the keynote's around this like clarity I have with the brand and the message and the voice and all that kind of stuff. So right now, I will be speaking on choosing change and creating possibilities.
Yeah. The thing that stands out for me also is something you mentioned earlier in the things jump out at you and you recognize, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or this is what I'm supposed to be developing. And that's been my experience as well with I write every day and I meditate and do all those things. And when the idea is ripe, because a lot of times it'll get repeated. You can't forget it, even if you try to forget it, even if you try to convince yourself this is going to be too much work, too much hassle, too much whatever. And it's still there, just right in your ear. And the more you've listened to that and the more you've taken action on it, the louder the volume gets on those ideas that are really aligned. Yeah. And it gets to the point where you just can't ignore them. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah. And I think that that's a piece of the awareness that I've built over time, is being able to pick up on those whispers that eventually turn into a shout, something you can't turn away from, kind of like what you were saying. And that's how I felt with writing. I just felt drawn to it it was unexplainable. It was like, it just felt like it was what I was supposed to do. And I think really comes down to, one, your ability to hear those callings, and then two, your willingness to act on them. I think Marianne Williamson has a quote that's, "The universe will give you the awareness, but you must take action on the awareness." So you can hear something and you can feel something, but if you don't do something about it, nothing's going to come from it.
What's interesting is you've got this story that you allude to in a lot of your other conversations, podcasts, even in your book. I read your book. I didn't see any details about this notorious car accident that you apparently got in, and it, caused you to change your perception on life and everything. So can we just start with you talking about that experience and the ramifications or implications of that experience?
Yeah. So it was 2013. I was in college, and we were just going out for a normal evening with a couple of my friends, and all was going well. And we get in the car and head back to our apartments at the end of the night. And we're just driving down the freeway. One moment it's like everything's normal, just laughing with our homies, all good. And the next moment we're spiraling out of control at like 85 miles per hour. And that whole moment was slow motion to me. It was like time froze, and I feel like I had like a really reflective experience while it was happening. It was one of those things where I was like, I can't believe this is actually happening to me. For so long, you think about like, oh, that's never going to happen to me. Like, I got this like golden bubble around me, protecting me, whatever, until it's actually happening to you. And I was like, oh shit, like this could we could be good or it could go like really bad. And from the look of it, like from outside looking in, this accident should have taken multiple lives. It was an accident between two cars, and both cars happened to be both of our friend group, and everyone walked away unscathed, which is like felt very universal and felt like something was protecting us that night. And I just remember when the accident had stopped and we had climbed out of the car, one car had done 2 rolls, landed tire side up, and the other car, my car, had slid on the driver's side all the way to the center divider. And I was the first one out of the car, and I just remember repeating and like screaming out loud, like, no, 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 no. And I was just thinking about that earlier today. And I feel like I just didn't want to accept that it happened because I wasn't sure the severity of the accident quite yet. Didn't know if we lost any friends, didn't know if anyone was injured, just in a state of trauma and shock. And kind of as that night progressed, we had left the scene, and we didn't want to go to bed because no one knew if we had concussions or anything like that. And so I remember going to McDonald's because it was the only place open. And we all go to McDonald's, sit down in the booth, and we just kind of sit there in silence and just looking at each other. What the fuck just happened? Like it was such a loud moment for all of us, and it really shook us all. And I don't know how the experience was for each and every person and what came after it. But I know for me, it was just a major wake-up call to see how quickly life could be ripped away from me. Was something that made me look at life moving forward way different, but also reflect on my life before that moment and ask myself, what can I do differently so that when my time comes, I know I didn't leave anything on the table. And so that was the biggest thing for me, was recognizing, I guess, the fragility of life and how precious it really is. And, I had really 2 decisions. I could let that car accident spiral my life completely out of control. I could go into the fear, I can go into the trauma, I can go into the shock and let it take control of me. Or I could recognize what happened, acknowledge the fact that that is a very traumatic experience, and work toward working through that trauma, and then making intentional choices and changes to move me in a direction that aligns me with where I want to be, so I know that I am living that fulfilling life for whenever that day comes when my time is up.
How old are you, Jordan?
29.
So you were you'd only been driving for a few years. Were you driving the car?
No, I was the passenger sitting right behind the passenger seat.
Why were you not driving your own car?
It wasn't my car.
Oh, just the car you were in. Got it.
The car was in, so my buddy was driving, and and our other friend was driving next to us, and we had both clipped on the freeway, 85
What
miles per
happened? Were
hour.
you guys like racing or listening to music or?
You know, no one actually knows what happened. I have my own perspective, what I think happened. So we're driving side by side, going like 85 miles per hour probably. And I remember like seconds before this happened, I had this urge to ask my friend to slow down because I just felt like we were going way too fast. But then something like quieted. And I think that's interesting because had I spoken up, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But maybe it was supposed to happen so I could have this understanding and perspective of how I think life should be lived for myself in order, aligning with the best life for me. And so we were side by side, and then there was a big rig in this other lane. And our friend starts to speed up around us. And right as he speeds up, the big rig starts to move over. And what I think happened is that he was in his blind spot. And so he swerves and doesn't see my other friend. And then we collide. And then we start to do the sway. We go one swing to the left, one swing to the right. And that's where I'm like, it's about to happen. Like we're about to be in a gnarly car accident. And then we hit the side and slide across 5 lanes of traffic. And then the other friends do 2 rolls, land tire side up.
Now, when I've ridden in the back seat of anybody's car, it's rare that I'm wearing a seatbelt. Did you have your seatbelt on?
So our car had our seatbelts on. No airbags came out. Our friend's car, airbags came out. No seatbelts on.
And no one got thrown from the car or anything like that. It was just everyone.
No. The worst injury was the driver in our car had glass that was shattering as we were sliding into the back of his hand from where he was holding the steering wheel. But every single person walked away that night, and no one spent the night in the hospital.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's take it back then, Jordan. Let's take it back to childhood. You and I share something in common. We both grew up in very privileged. It sounds like you grew up in a very privileged, lifestyle. We're both children and family of 6. I have 3 brothers that I grew up with, and both of my parents. And talk about your family life growing up in terms of the philosophies and the ideologies that you would hear your parents echo as you were growing up and becoming a teenager and an adult, and what kind of takeaways did you have from that sort of background?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing for me was my parents had always let us do the things that we were naturally drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
We were given the gift of not having a predetermined path. And I think that was one of the most freeing things as a teen, but also in my life now, because I had that permission from a young age. I feel that it's easier to give myself permission now to do the things that I feel drawn to, even if they might not be the most traditional path or the thing that you think someone should do. Having that permission from a young age has opened the doors to my life a lot, and it has put me on the path that I'm on because it has allowed me to just go after like what's in my heart and what I really think is right for me. And so that was like one of the biggest takeaways for me. And that's one thing I tell my parents all the time was like, I'm just so grateful that they didn't put a path on us. They didn't want us to go to a certain college. They didn't want us to get a specific degree. They didn't force us into a career that wasn't aligned with us. They always gave us space to make those decisions for ourselves.
Would they explicitly say that, or would they just not say anything when you were, wanting to go and devote your life to baseball or whatever you were interested in doing growing up?
I think it was more of the way that they led and the unconditional support they gave toward the things that we were interested in. So for example, I went to Cal State Fullerton and got a degree in business finance. When I first went to school, the degree felt like it would align me with some sort of big paycheck. And that seemed really interesting to me at the time. Thought I wanted to be involved with numbers, business stuff. And then I get to graduation and I'm like, I don't think this is really what I want to do. Like, I don't know if this is actually what's meant for me. And so going into a career right out of college just never felt right. And that was kind of the thing that pushed me toward doing my solo backpacking trip, was going to do a little bit more soul searching, figuring out more of myself, because I had not really stepped into who I was meant to be quite yet. I had a lot of things to work through myself, from childhood insecurities and things like that. And my parents never said one word about that being a bad decision. Matter of fact, I was in Europe and I was about 5 weeks into my trip, was supposed to come home. At the time, I was single. I had no job. I had moved out of my house before my trip. And so there was nothing really pulling me home. And I wanted to stay longer. I wanted to skip my flight and continue to travel for another month and a half. And my parents were on board from the second that I said that's what I wanted to do. And so it was just the way that they led and the support they gave. It wasn't explicit to the point where like, you can do whatever you want. It's just the way that they treated me when I would be interested in trying something.
I want to talk more about that in a moment, but first I would like to just go back to high school again and talk about baseball, because I heard you talk about this anecdote on another podcast where you said you were a strong defensive player, but you were lacking as an offensive player, and you decided to be very intentional about fixing that. How did you do that?
I figured that it was probably time to listen to my dad, when he would just motivate me to really put in the reps required to get better at something. And so the summer, I think it was in the summer before tryouts, I hung up a net in our garage, got a tee, and got a bucket of 50 balls. And every day I would go out there by myself in the garage and just swing. Simple stuff. It wasn't even rocket science, just doing the most simple mechanics of baseball. But they were the things that I needed to work on the most in my game. Like you said, defense was my thing. It came natural. I didn't have to do those small, minute, detail-oriented drills. But hitting, not my strongest point. I think that summer where I was just really intentional with focusing on those small little things is what over time had compounded into me being able to go to tryouts and then show off this entire new skill that I built, all from this to being consistent with just these daily small actions.
And were you already a fairly disciplined person in school? Or because you have it seems like you have a lot of discipline today, just in the way that you move with your building your keynote speaking and you're writing your books and stuff like that. Was that something that if we were to look at the breadcrumbs leading up to this moment, that we would have seen outside of that baseball approach?
Yeah, I think I've always been a good student. And I say that in terms of like, did my homework, was on track, didn't let things fall through the cracks. And I think that comes from like, I'm someone who like just wants to get things done. I don't know if that's because that's the personal thing that I need for my own like level of fulfillment, and I don't want to feel bad if I don't do things right. Mm-hmm. But I would say yes. Who I am today is a direct reflection of how I was as a child in some capacity.
All right. So you get this graduate degree in finance?
Yeah. So, well, undergrad, but yes, finance.
Undergrad degree in finance. Okay. And you're working at a restaurant.
Yes. I work at a restaurant my senior year.
What restaurant were you working in?
Old Spaghetti Factory in Newport Beach, California.
Okay. What was that money like?
Good enough to be a college kid going to class 2 days a week and surfing the other 5.
So quitting that job and going backpacking was not a big decision for you. You were just like, okay, this is just a temporary thing anyway. This is what I really want to do. Or was it a big deal and you had to like have a come to Jesus moment with yourself?
It was a big deal. It was a big deal because for most of my life, up until that trip, I was very insecure.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the level of confidence that I have now. Wasn't sure of who I was or what I wanted to do. So I had a lot of uncertainty just within my own spirit. And so that was really outside of my character to do something like that. I remember telling my mom that I was alone. I think she was shocked. If you ask her today, she couldn't believe that I was going to do this. And I'm the youngest of four. I'm her baby. So she has all these other worries that come with that. But it was by no means something that someone would have guessed that I was going to do. But it felt right. Like I was supposed to originally go with a friend. And he had at the last minute, right before we bought tickets, he had said that he had a job and they were doing training in New York during the summer. And so I was like, okay, well, he's out. But like, and this was way before I was really deeply connected to my own spiritual journey and the awareness of the universe and things happening for specific reasons. But now looking back, like I wasn't meant to go with someone. I had a lot of deep inner work to do, and I was going to be able to achieve that better, whether I was conscious of it or not, had I gone on that trip by myself. So out of character, yes, but mentally also, yes.
Well, your siblings also all had a gap year or gap weeks or months or something like that. So you also had that as a point of reference. Right?
For sure. And I think that's what originally kind of inspired the thought of it being a possibility, was that I saw the people that I look up to do something similar in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I think there was a level of permission that came from seeing, my siblings do something similar.
So what were three takeaways from that trip? Obviously, journaling, the power of journaling was something that happened during that trip, or was that before?
Yeah, I had, my biggest thing in life, and I think I would say it's probably my top core value, is intention. Everything I do comes with a level of intention that I hold that to I have a high standard for myself when it comes to intention.
What do you mean by intention?
Doing things with purpose and assigning meaning to things, so that they potentially give me, what's the right way to word this? That I will get more out of it for the betterment of myself. And just showing up as my fullest version. I don't want to do something like you're saying, like earlier we were talking about being dedicated. I know what I'm capable of doing and I know what I'm here to do. And I personally can't show up half-assed because I couldn't live with knowing that I didn't give it my all. And so when I think about intention in my life, if I'm going to do something, it needs to be a full body yes. And I need to be fully involved in that process and not just like half in, half out, 1 foot out the door. So when I thought about my trip, I was like, well, I want this to be very intentional. I don't want it to just be a Euro tour of going to bar hops and all this kind of stuff, but I wanted to come back with something, whether it was tangible or not tangible. And so that's when I had the idea of doing the journal, because that felt like a really good way to, one, document what was happening, but also explore the feelings and things that were coming up for me. And that was the first time I really started to write. In high school, I hated writing and wasn't very good at it. Mind you, I was probably writing topics that didn't really matter to me. And so it was the first time I actually was going to approach writing from a place of curiosity for myself and writing in a way that really felt fulfilling to me. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where the journaling did start, was that.
Yeah. You became a long form essayist much later, but I'm just curious, like you have so many parallels. Like I had a restaurant job that I quit to follow my heart, and it was a big deal because I was making good money, but I knew that this is what I was meant to be doing in my life, working as a server. I went to Europe, with nothing, with just like a duffel bag and and I started journaling. I started journaling on that trip, and I found that it's so funny because for me, I still have all of those journal entries, and I oftentimes will go back and read through them fondly. And my style at that time was to write in a sort of narrative fashion where I was telling a linear story about my day, what happened first, second, third, etc. And it allows me to sort of relive the experience in my mind. So it wasn't very abstract. And I'm curious to hear what your style of journaling was and why that style.
So originally in that first journal, it was a lot of recapping and writing about what was actually happening around me.
Mm-hmm.
So like actually like daily diary kind of style of like documentation with the intention that I could like relive those moments. But the nature of myself is introspective. That's just who I am. And that's why I do what I do, is because it comes so naturally to me, like having self-awareness, looking within, looking for lessons and everything, and finding ways to then teach people around me those things that I'm learning through my life experience. So at first it was very much documenting like what my days were like, because that's really all I really knew to do back then. It has since evolved and it's a lot different now. It's still very open-ended though. I don't use journal prompts as much as I would just have a free writing session and kind of be just open channeling to see what would kind of come through. But it is, whether I'm writing, recapping the day or diving a little bit deeper into maybe why I'm feeling a certain way or what's causing a certain emotion, it's therapeutic, whichever style I was doing. It was always, whether that was the initial intention, that's kind of what I did receive from it.
And you say the first thing you tell people to do when they're starting their process of self-discovery is to buy a journal. So what do you mean by self-discovery, and how do you propose that people use a journal to explore themselves?
Yeah, so I think journaling is like the easiest way to unlock truths of your inner world that will catapult you on your journey, truly. My perspective is that the first step toward improvement, whether that's changing your life, discovering yourself, just making a small shift, is self-awareness and not action. So you can't make a change or take an action or discover something about yourself if you're not actually aware of what's going on in here. And so for me, the journal is the direct key and the direct door to that world. And so the more I journal, the more I uncover, the more I feel connected, the more I feel at peace, the more I feel grounded. And that's why I think it's the most crucial part of a self-discovery journey, because it's the most intimate way to get to know yourself, and it's free.
And you kind of guide people through steps. You call one of these steps is a guided brainstorm. What's a guided brainstorm?
So a guided brainstorm would be proposing a specific question. So I think in the book, I use the question like, what is my purpose? Or it could be any other question. And you're just doing like a brain dump. So it's just make a bullet list. And the way I do it now is I will set a timer. So I'll set a timer for 20 minutes. I'll put on some sort of focus music, whether like binaural beats or just like lo-fi kind of stuff that's not distracting, that can almost like disappear into the background, be locked in. And I'll just write answers to that question without thinking and without judging what's coming out. And so I think when I do that, I actually allow myself to get out of my own way, remove the ego, remove the self-limiting beliefs, the negative chatter, and just truly write from a place of purity. And there's a lot of clarity that comes through that, because a lot of the times when I'm brainstorming a bullet list in response to a question, I'm writing things that I've never thought about before. And so I feel like these things are actually coming from a higher place.
Yeah. What I'm referring to when I'm saying, oh, you said this, you did that, I'm referring to this book that you have out called You Deserve this shit? I love the title. And I want to talk a little bit later about the process of creating that book. But I guess the obvious question for me is, what do you mean by this shit? What is this shit you're referring to that we deserve?
And I think like the true essence of that book is self-discovery and knowing oneself. And that's what I think everyone deserves, because when you develop the relationship to yourself, I think that's when your life really starts to begin. Because we were put here to have this human experience. And that human experience becomes much more grand, and the spectrum of it widens the more that you get to know the person that's experiencing it, or you might say the spirit that's experiencing it. But the more you get to know the self that is experiencing this experience, the wider that spectrum gets, the more grand the experience gets. And so I think the things that people deserve is that connection to themselves, because at the end of the day, this is who you're going to be with forever until the end of time. And so understanding and having a relationship with yourself is going to give you just a much more clear roadmap, whether that's understanding your emotions, understanding your wants, needs, and desires, understanding what you resonate with or who you want to become. But really getting to know yourself is what people deserve.
What do you say, as a sort of final question, what do you say to people who, they hear this whole conversation, they get inspired, they're maybe working at a job where they don't feel particularly fulfilled, and they just say, I have these things that I'm curious about, I just don't have time. I just don't have the time, or I don't have the following. What do you say to those people?
Simplify. Most people get change wrong. And most people think that change is all or nothing. They think that in order to make a difference or do something or make progress, they have to do something crazy or they have to make some massive shift. But I mean, if that's your way of thinking, then you will feel paralyzed and you're not going to want to change. You're not going to want to do something different, or you're not going to want to go after that thing. But if you believe that there's power in small shifts and doing small actions and the fact that they compound over time, similar to the dots that you connected back right into my story, if you believe that there's power in those small shifts, change and going after something is much more approachable. You will have the inspiration to really create space for your own magic to happen. And I think that's where people need to start, is realizing that things can be much more simple than you may think that you need to. Because at the end of the day, making changes or making shifts, you want them to be sustainable. You're not trying to choose change or go after something one time. The goal is to make it a way of life and a lifestyle. And so what I would say is start smaller than you think. Make a small shift and see where that compounds over time. For me, I picked up a journal and now I'm following this dream of speaking. I wouldn't be here had I not decided just to journal. If you compare those two things, they're wildly far apart and wildly different. But if you listen back to this episode and pick breadcrumbs, it will lead you right to where I am now.
Love that, man. That's a great place to end it. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on to this podcast and share so vulnerably. And are you going to be in Phoenix?
Yeah, I'll be there. Masterclass and the gala.
Yeah. And you made a reference earlier to this organization called Impact 11. You and I are both a part of that community, and I think it deserves us kind of giving a little shout out to them. That's the community that will give you the playbook on how to become a viable, profitable keynote speaker. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. And if you go to their website, which is impact11.com, and look at the boot camp, that's where I recommend starting. I'm sure you're the same. You recommend starting there. Don't be too bewildered by the sticker price. It's worth every single dime that they charge. If you're serious about building a keynote speaking platform. So tell them that Jordan and Light recommended you. We can reach out so we could get a little bit of, credit in the community. But yeah, I sing their praises all the time. And, and I'm glad that I keep meeting people like you who I'm happy to have on the podcast. What were you going to say about it?
Oh, I just wanted to quickly add, because you'd mentioned, it will take a little bit of work. I will say, I went to my first boot camp in June of 2022, so a little over a year ago, and then joined the community in this February. The amount of progress I have made coming into speaking as someone who has zero experience and no background and no message and no positioning, I actually have the chills right now, is out of this world. Like, I would not be where I am today without the experiences that I've had through the community, with the people that I've met. Honestly, the unconditional support and generosity that I've felt through that community has lifted me up way higher than I would have been if I'd gone alone. And so I tell people this all the time. I probably shouldn't say this, but I would pay more money for it. Like, it's that valuable. I probably shouldn't inspire them but you know what I mean? It's like, it's invaluable.
I'm the same. I've spent more money on this community than I've ever spent on any community in my life, and it's worth every penny. So
yeah, it's honestly made me go further and faster.
Yeah,
with people that are doing it too. So that's why I just want to, my personal shout out for them is, it's a great place, whether you have zero experience or a ton of experience, it can take you far. Yeah, and then to you, like, just thanks for reaching out and wanting to make this happen. It took a couple months here and there to get things sorted, but I feel like it was meant to be to do it now. And so I appreciate you opening the conversation for me and just a place to talk.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.